And we are live once again with the Think Fitness Life podcast. We are at episode 17 now. And today we have a very fun episode about breathing. And just for a reminder out there, this podcast is dedicated to mindset, exercise, and nutrition when it comes to health and fitness. We always think of longevity, the longer term, the bigger picture. And we have three hosts of this show myself, Matt Gluckman, and then we have Eric Menchie and Mike Urso, both professionals in what they do. I learned under them when I was at Equinox, and here we are now. So I think we have an announcement from Eric, and then we'll get into breathing.
So I was reading through some health and science stuff in the news, and it came across that the China culture is now obsessed with working out. Their goals are to get six-pack abs. What is interesting is the Chinese culture is not really big on working out and the traditional exercises. So the fads in fitness are kind of spilling over, and people are starting to see these models with abs and these fashion designs with abs, and they have a saying, if you don't lose the weight in May, only sadness will be left in June. And that's their kind of big motivational drive over there to get skinny. So they're getting a lot of people with just the drive to get abs and hit the gym, and it's turning out to be a good, I wouldn't say social experiment, but a good progression of exercise into their culture.
Wow. That's interesting. So like the Western diet spilled over, and now it's like the Western fitness style is now making its way.
Which the diet was bad.
It's interesting.
You can't have one without the other.
Right. We're such a bad influence over here.
Pretty much.
I mean, the Chinese and Asian cultures have such a rich and deep history in like the martial arts and Tai Chi and all of those like movement. What's the word I'm looking for? Like, movement based type of fitness, or whatever it is. They really were like far ahead of the game when it came to like, we see things coming out here like animal flow and gymnastic bodies and all these other type of training modalities that are only like body weight and three-dimensional movement. And we know as trainers how effective and good that is for your body to like be moving it in a three-dimensional field and under different types of loads. And it's really interesting, and it will be interesting to kind of see how that new Western style of fitness or bodybuilding, I guess, style workouts will, change or evolve their culture. So to be determined, I guess.
Healthy with their movement and their like. Have you ever seen some over there? They squat for like and just sit and hang out and do all this stuff, and they have some good structural and bases to build off. So I think it'll be good as long as like you said, we don't translate our Western diet over to them even more.
Yeah, I feel like they were far superior when it came to understanding the body and the mind and how that played a role, and your spirit and your psychology. Yeah, I feel like they are light years ahead of Western culture, and it's almost like you got to think that classic sort of predicament of like the dog with the bone in his mouth. He comes up to a river and he sees a bigger bone in the river reflection, and he goes to grab it and lets go. Like, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. You might have that perception, but I would almost think that they had. I would think that we have steered away from that too far, and the Asian cultures kind of mastered that part already. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah, like you said, we're bad influences. We are totally terrible influences, and we just do it with a smile on our face, so everyone thinks that we're doing it right.
Well, the Asian culture, and more specifically, I saw a documentary about not China, where we're talking about here, but Japan. And I think specifically Okinawa, Japan, is like where some of the longest living people, the most what do they call it? Centenarians live. So I was reading that Japan has like the record. It broke its own record again for having 65,000 people in Japan that are over the age of 100 years old. which is a problem for their economy in a way. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they really have mastered the art of longevity. I mean, I really would be interested in taking a deeper dive down what it is like that their lifestyle involves. And I would imagine that exercise plays a big part of it in their ability to like move effectively really into the later stages of their life. I would also think that, like we talked about, that interconnected mind and body experience, they must be just happier and less stressed out than most other people.
Oh,
I would have to
absolutely.
think.
I almost guarantee it. I would definitely see that. Less stress for sure. More
Mhm.
peaceful living. Whereas Westerners feel like the need to conquer and demolish things.
Yeah.
Well, cool. That was a cool little announcement. Definitely want to dive further into that, even into looking at other cultures and how they operate sort of on a bigger scale with health and fitness. That is pretty interesting. Thanks for bringing that up, Eric. Let's go into breathing. But before we start, I just want to make a shout out to anyone who's thought about writing in an email. Please don't hesitate. Write us thinkfitnesslife@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you guys, whether it's comments, whether it's questions. As silly as your question may be, as simple as it may be, we'd still love to hear it. Or if it's super, deep into some specifics, that's fine too. We'd love to hear from you guys. And then the last announcement is just next week, we're going to talk about conditioning, kind of everything involved in setting goals and ways to go about it and be effective. So, with breathing, I'd like to start off with just the abdominal flooring portion of breathing and the pressurization in your own cylinder, we'll call it your core cylinder between your hips and your neck. Would
If you
someone
want
like
to
to
start there,
explain?
I think you have to talk about the diaphragm and how it has a function on breathing and affects the pelvic floor and the core muscles. If we don't have a
Okay.
proper diaphragm function, it throws off our breathing and respiratory functions on the left and the right, which a lot of people will neglect and forget about the diaphragm, and they'll just kind of breathe in certain patterns, which we'll get into in a bit. But the function of controlling pressure through a system is letting our whole system, our whole body, which is our nervous system, respiratory system, musculoskeletal system, function on a basis and keep regulated.
So when people say diaphragmatic breathing, they specifically mean just using your diaphragm to create pressure?
Use correct, but using the diaphragm in the right position and with muscles in the body
Okay.
moving the right directions in the correct movements to promote healthy, optimal breathing.
So you're talking about movement of the
Correct.
air. And are you talking like the thorax, the abdominals? Like, is it just sitting in my lungs or is it kind of moving all over
We're
the
talking that
place?
whole a big thing is the thorax inside your rib cage for the mediastinum, the space in there, and that abdominal pressure also helps. So your abs are big exhaling muscles that a lot of people neglect to use. So then that can throw off breathing patterns.
So I think
Yeah.
first we also need to talk about why it's important to control your breathing, why it's important to have good.
Well, I was just gonna dive into that. So,
Cool.
like, first, if you think about just the um, kind of the basic kinematics of what's going on with the diaphragm when you're inhaling. So, when you're inhaling, you're going to contract, or the diaphragm kind of tightens, and it actually moves downward. So, when it moves downward, like the chest, the space in your chest is actually increasing. So it kind of opens up space in your chest. Your lungs can then expand, and then all those little intercostal muscles that are between your ribs there are going to then try to like open up and allow that diaphragmatic or the belly to kind of expand. In that case, as that we call it like a parachute, as that diaphragm moves down. What that also does is, if you think about when you're opening up all that space in your chest, yes, you're getting your lungs the opportunity to take in and to increase their size and space. You're also allowing for all those other muscles in the neck, the traps, the upper back. All those muscles are going to down regulate, and those are the muscles that when we breathe in properly when we're starting to. So if everyone with me takes like a long, slow, deep breath into your belly and exhales, you won't feel a lot of like tightness or shortness in your chest. It's a nice long drawn out breath. If we get into like fight or flight mode or sympathetic tone versus parasympathetic tone, that breath becomes very short. Those breathing accessory muscles around the neck, like scalenes, SCM, traps, all that area around the neck then starts to engage to now work and open up the chest, because now we're breathing in through our chest because we're not getting a full deep inhalation of the diaphragm dropping down. So that causes that a lot of tension, a lot of upregulation of tone in the body. And so we have all these tight muscles. People may then, get into having neck pain or, a lot of stress that gets carried in that area. So the breath really is that link and proper diaphragmatic breathing to allowing all of those muscles up around the head and neck to relax, to focus on a nice deep belly breath and allow for your body to train yourself properly. I mean, if you think about it, breathing is probably the one activity we do more than anything in our entire lifetime that is extremely unconscious. We don't
I've been
think
doing
about
it my whole life.
Right, with all of us. I mean, we're doing it every minute of every day, every second of every day, and we don't even think about it. And so, if we were able to, and this is why meditation and all these other things we can get into later are so effective at allowing us to get out of that fight or flight response and reduce stress, because now we can now focus on to just feeling what's going on, and that tone is now down regulated. Our body can now kind of shut down
And I love that
and
you
not
said
be so tense.
So pump the brakes over there,
parasympathetic
Speed
system
Racer, but
is a lot of times people don't realize breathing helps regulate your nervous system and regulate your brain. And once you can kind of up and down regulate that, just like meditation, you're going to have control over your whole human system. And once you gain control, you're going to move better, you're going to feel better, you're going to optimally perform and function better. And I think that's the end goal for a lot of people is getting that nervous system optimization and limiting stress and everything else.
I want to just go back real quick to what Mike was saying, just about how, you're basically adding fitness on top of dysfunction if you're breathing through your chest. A good little test to control your breathing or to even see how you're breathing right is put one hand on your belly, one hand on your chest, and just take some big deep breaths. And you want to notice that your belly moves before your chest. And more often than not, if you're one of those person that has tightness around your neck or finds that you're out of breath a lot, more often than not, you're probably breathing through your chest first. So I think that's a good little indicator, a good little self-test you can do, self-check you can do, not only to see how you're breathing, but also to change it up and just on the slowest level, just practice pushing through your diaphragm or your belly first before the chest rises with the
And
inhale.
something else to add on to that too, a lot of people think, like we've been saying belly breathing here a lot, but really when we want a proper diaphragmatic breath and we want that diaphragm to drop down and open up as we inhale and take in air, what's actually happening is more of a 3D expansion of that diaphragm. So we don't just want the anterior part of our body to expand, we want to focus on
Alligator
the
breathing,
sides.
right?
Yeah, so if we're pushing into our side obliques, that squishy part between where our last rib and our pelvis is, where you can now actually insert your fingers into feeling into your abdominal cavity, you can breathe, take a big deep breath in, and see if your diaphragm and belly can actually push your hands out, so that you're getting now breathing not just from the front but from the sides and also into your lower back. A lot of times, and you guys know, anybody who sits with like an anterior pelvic tilt, which is a very common pelvic position, you do have a really high level of tone into your lumbar spine and those erectors. And so if you're not getting proper breathing posteriorly either, well then, yeah, you're going to have a whole lot of high tone in that area and your back's going to be tight. It's going to really just put your pelvis out of whack, and you're not going to be able to get a proper, intra-abdominal pressure breathing, like a brace, which we'll talk about shortly. Which will be effective when you are doing very heavy lifting
And once you get
need
into
to brace
that
your
position,
spine properly.
your diaphragm, which we need to breathe, turns into a muscle of posture. So it's just kind of holding you there. And a lot of people get stuck in inhalation. So that, like Mike said, they can't fully create that pressure, which is a good long exhale, driving those ribs down and sealing that cylinder and creating air to go out. So we get stuck in the state of just minimum air is coming in, minimum air is going out. Air transfer is bad. But I want to kind of jump back. Go for it.
And I just want to mention real quick, just because you guys are really, I'm loving it. I'm loving how in depth you're going with the importance of breathing. I just want to start off real quick and explain one little quick analogy to explain the purpose of breathing and airflow and airflow affecting performance. If you think of like a car motor, it has the air intake, it has the exhaust, it has the engine that's burning and churning and creating power. If you put a potato in your exhaust pipe, you're literally going to stall out the motor. It's because you are restricting the exhaust from leaving the car or leaving the tailpipe. So now there's not going to be any room for fresh air, fresh oxygen to come into the motor so that it won't be able to run. Same kind of deal with, I'm sure everyone's had those experiences where you're squeezing to finish out that set and all of a sudden you just have to stop. And more often than not, it's not due to muscular fatigue. It's due to poor airflow and you holding your breath and that buildup of carbon dioxide and then waste products without resupplying fresh fuel to the motor, essentially.
Well, where else do we see it too? Did you ever notice, like, anybody, and most everybody's done this, we try to stretch. Let's say maybe we lie on our back and we lift our leg up and we're trying to stretch, and then all of a sudden you're like, let's say you're holding my breath. Yeah, why am I holding my breath, right? You're guarding and you're protecting. And so your muscle cannot release and it cannot downregulate that sympathetic tone if you're not taking a nice, slow, controlled breath. Your body's going to hang on to tension because holding your breath is a way to create tension and create, protection, or stability. We want to be able, especially when we're doing mobility exercises, the breath is extremely important to slow down and really put a lot of focus into.
Yeah, that's why I think Joe Rogan was quoting like this guy, Nick Gregoriadis, and he said, yoga is a martial art that you do against yourself. And it just made me think of that stretching thing because we will fight to get into positions or fight to get a stretch and a certain feeling. But then all of a sudden you're just holding your breath. Like you said, you're restricting that movement, restricting that airflow, restricting that blood flow. And you're ultimately you're doing yourself a disservice. If you stay in that position
long term, what's going to happen to your fitness, your health? That's just going to wear you down over a course of,
it's chronic stress.
If you can't
absolutely
regulate that,
it's a form of chronic stress
in the fitness industry, especially, and you're having a lot of people work out, but they can't get out of chronic stress. How, as coaches, are we efficiently really helping these people out?
Well, right. Yeah, I think it's important. What Mike said was that, if you're not breathing into your diaphragm, you're not only just doing it wrong, but you're doing it wrong in a way that is going to make things a lot worse for you in the future, just depending on how much time you've been doing it wrong, right? Like you said, you're just creating more tension, more pressure, more stability in your chest, in your upper thorax, and that prevents movement from everywhere else and usually leads to, like you said,
even further than neck pain, which is a factor we'll get into in a bit, is if you're in a position through the thorax and the rib cage and you're locked up in breathing, you're going to affect the muscle chains above and below that whole system. So you can have full body compromise at this point, and you're putting muscles and joints, ligaments, bones into positions that aren't used to optimal function. They go to move over and over again, wear and tear, tightness, all that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of people get this neck tightness is because, like Mike said, they try to use those muscles to pull the rib cage up on inhalation, but instead of using the diaphragm. And I think that's a lot where Amber had someone like kind of saying, okay, breathe for me. And people either go belly breathing or they almost like shrug their shoulders up because they're trying to pull air in through their neck muscles. And that's where people carry a lot of tension.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, think about any movie scene where you've seen somebody like blow out a birthday cake. The first thing they do is really exaggerate that inhale, like you said, kind of like by shrugging and like almost picking their head up, and they're pulling themselves up before they're even trying to breathe down into their abdominals.
Yeah, and because people don't breathe properly, they're not, and their positioning is off, right? Their whole spine position, maybe their cervical spine is in extension. They're not able to get a really good breath in. I'm thinking of like you remember taking like CPR class. We have to do it like every 2 years, and when you're like wanting to give breath and open up the airway of the victim, or your dummy, you tilt the head back, right? You like tilt the head back and you put the neck
Mm-hmm.
into like extension, right? And so if you look at like most people who have really bad posture, they are in extension. They're in a form of that. And they're right because they're not breathing mechanics, their breathing mechanics aren't proper. They're like going into that extension to open up the airway to try to find other ways to capture more oxygen flow into their
So it's like a
system.
compensation.
It's a compensatory pattern, absolutely. I mean, and there's other things going on like gravity and sitting and hanging on your meat when you're hanging on, sitting in a chair, as opposed to sitting on, you know what I mean? Like just hanging on your meat instead of sitting on your spine. That's one thing that puts your whole posture
Oh
out of
yeah.
whack, and that's a whole nother episode. Um, but you know what I mean? Like, so that's a compensatory pattern that happens. And, when you're in that extension, the SCM, that
Oh yeah.
Sternocleidomastoid.
sternocleidomastoid,
Yeah.
that thing is completely shortened when you're in that position. So that's going to be all jacked up and tight in extension. And so those are accessory breathing muscles that are going to be
So
tight.
you're
So
not
you're
even
breathing
using
improper.
your right,
No, and
right. You're not even using
it's
the
gonna
best
pull
muscles.
you into
So
that position.
yeah,
So
Right.
that's where you
yeah,
get a
Yeah.
lot of like
absolutely.
pathologies and
Yeah.
issues, is because people are literally not using muscles
Mhm.
that are designed to breathe, using other muscles that are designed to help move ribs and turn necks and stuff, but they're now becoming, sagittal plane muscles where they're just pulling up and they lose function transverse, frontal, and everything else starts going up awry.
Okay,
Mhm.
so say that I have really bad posture, and I definitely notice that I have poor breathing patterns. What's my first step? Is it you know yeah? You guys take it. What's my first step?
I mean, I can go. What I would say is, and I've seen improvements with people's mobility and posture almost, I would say, instantaneously with doing some form of either supine breathing, 90-90 breathing, or a for 90-90 breathing if there's a bad pelvic positioning, but also just crocodile breathing.
Okay.
As long as they're not like somebody's not in a really bad anterior pelvic tilt, and they're lying in this massive extension through their lumbar spine. Crocodile breathing is good because I'm getting tactile feedback. They're on their stomach. I have them, with their hands kind of on top of each other, forehead resting on top of the hands, and I want them pressing themselves off the ground. So I want them breathing and pushing their belt into the floor. I want 3D expansion. I may put my hand on top of their back, or even a sandbag or something that makes them have to take an inhalation and breathe and push through their back to get that 3D expansion. And so just by doing that, right, we talked about creating all that tightness in the neck and around the rib cage and all that tightness through all the upper back and all those muscles. People have poor shoulder mobility and poor thoracic mobility because they're so jacked up from improper breathing. I've put people literally in a breathing position like crocodile breathing, did like 10, 12 breaths with them, nice, slow, controlled breaths, stood them up, and then had them move through their thoracic spine. And magically, there is so much tone that's been down regulated. And now their movement and mobility and shoulder mobility has improved simply because we shut off all of those muscles that were
Yeah, so you,
hypertonic
you
from
basically
breathing
take gravity
improperly.
away from them.
And real quick, just for those listening, crocodile breathing, you're laying on your belly, you're prone, versus supine breathing, you're laying on your back. And that 90-90 position is just picking your knees up so they're over your hips and your feet are on the wall parallel to your knees.
Yeah, it's almost like you're sitting on a chair that
Yeah,
just
so
tipped
for
over
most
on your
people,
back.
you're taking them out
You
of
know,
basically like taking gravity away from them and kind of like seeing what they can do in a supine position or prone position without forces.
absolutely. Yeah, because
Oh yeah.
when you have, yeah, and when you have full like you're on the ground, you have full stability.
You shut
Your
off.
spine doesn't, yeah, your spine doesn't have to work to create stability
Yeah.
or any kind of tension to hold yourself upright against gravity. Yeah, everything's able to then down regulate and fully relax, and you get a full
No,
relaxation of all those
And
muscles.
you can just also revert back to how you should progress something. You know, we started off as babies on our back, and then we rolled over
Absolutely.
and then we stood up. So
Great point.
it's a
Great
great
point.
way
Yeah.
to regress yourself and then also progress yourself.
Yeah, developmentally, that's the first like kinesthetic like type of thing we do is just lie on our back and our belly just expands. If you look at a baby, their bellies are always like all like pushed out and they're just breathing extremely well. They also have really good proper alignment, with their head, perfectly, sitting on. And when they sit up, you can see that there's no forward head posture. I mean, also, if I had a head that was, 2 times the weight of my body, I'd probably sit up straight too. It'd be like, I'd have good posture if I wore like a helmet all day, every day, something that's pushing me down. So,
I mean, just one more thing to add to this point, then we'll go back to the breathing. Just I remember what a difference you teaching me basic rolling patterns. What difference that made in my core control, and let alone other people's and my clients, and just something as simple as a simple primal movement that we first learned. The benefits it can have. It's pretty astonishing. But yeah, back to breathing.
back to the air movement. Well, it all plays role in because if you don't have proper breathing, you're gonna. If babies didn't do what they did and sat all around all day, they would be dysfunctional and have poor breathing. Is basically what we did as humans. We're not really. This system's not built to be seated for 12 hours a day. So then you look at kids move and breathe. It's like, well, how do we get back there? And you tell people you gotta want to mimic that.
Real quick, would you say that the way your typical 9 to 5er
Mhm.
comes to you, we're talking like 30s to mid 40s, late 40s, whatever, that comes to you, the way that they have trouble breathing, the way they breathe, you could say that that breathing is actually most beneficial to their
Totally.
posture in a chair?
If you
Okay.
want to correct, now posture's an interesting word. It's not like seated up straight, shoulders back. Posture is how your systems are integrated. If you want to create good posture through your body, the human system, the first thing I would do is start with breathing. Is start with fixing the pull of a right diaphragm over a left diaphragm and moving air into different chambers, because most people get stuck into one side breathing and cause a lot of issues. So
Gotcha. Okay. So real quick, before the side thing, we're just talking top and bottom real quick. I'm sitting down here and I'm in a
Yep.
flex position, right? I'm flexing my lower abdominals. That prevents me from getting good airflow out of my diaphragm. So that's what creates that habit of, or that adaptation, or whatever you want to call it, into just chest breathing. So in a way, the body is adapting to its stimulus, which for extended period of time is just sitting, right? Like even drive to work, you get to work, you drive back home, and then what do? You probably sit on your
Mhm.
couch,
Yeah.
at least some part of the day. Um, so okay, so
yeah,
top
absolutely.
bottom, that creates a difference. But why would somebody have more left right?
Well, all right. So you're sitting right now, correct?
Actually, I'm
Okay.
bouncing on one
When you're
toe. Yeah, no, I'm
sitting, and
sitting.
whoever's out there listening, what do you feel when you're sitting? Are you feeling more right side, so more right butt, more left butt? What are you feeling when you're sitting? Are you leaning towards the right, leaning towards the left?
Yeah, I definitely feel more of my right than my left. So is that an indicator that I'm breathing more into my right diaphragm
I
than
would
my
say
left
your
diaphragm?
right diaphragm is positioned better for respiration, so it's pulling air into the left. So most every person is we're built like this
Okay.
is has three lobes of lungs on the right, two on the left, and we have more of an anchored of the
Okay.
diaphragm on the right side with the spine and everything else with the liver supported. So we get pulled into the right side and our body compensates back on top of that and our breathing gets thrown off. So our right diaphragm is domed and good to go with those right ab wall. And our left side is more an extended position where it's tonic and we're just bringing air in. So for someone sitting like that all day into their right side, think about it. If you drove on
Yeah.
a right hand turn, like going clockwise in a car, your right side tires would be worn compared to your left. And that's basically what happens over.
Hmm.
I mean, we take what, 20,000 to 23,000 breaths a
I
day.
was just gonna calculate it out. Our
That's how,
respiration rate, and
that's how
then
many
multiply
times
it
your
by like
diaphragm
hours, and
contracts a day. Think about that plus 20, 30 years. We're getting a lot of right side issues. So that's where that
right,
imbalance comes from.
right. Okay, okay. I'm understanding it a lot more now. Honestly, this is I was happy about this podcast. I knew I was going to learn a lot from you two. Um, so basically, we're talking about here is how breathing can end up making you more right side dominant in your diaphragm as you pull in the
Yes,
air.
your right side
Correct.
becomes.
Okay. And then that will lead, I feel like that is one reason that can lead to somebody having like left hip issues or left glute issues or
Oh,
left
totally.
core issues.
Yep. Because
Is that
when you
correct?
think
Okay.
whatever, all right, so your right side's more dominant, your left side. Yeah.
Active more. Right. It's getting
Now
stronger more. It's
that's
working more.
inside our cylinder. Think what has to happen below. So think the pelvis position. Like Mike said, if you're in a position on a right of like elevation and locked up, you're anterior tilted on the left, you're open. I mean, we're just causing a lot of issues down below the chain. So then we
Right.
get overdeveloped on one side.
So how do we practice our left? How do we activate it more and work on being more even or making up for lost
So a
work?
lot of times what I coach and is you have to take that from being on the right side and you have to mimic that right position on the left. So I tell a lot of people you have to exhale and pull that left rib cage down, and then you have to get your sternum towards the left and then pull your hip if it's in a position of flexion back under you and get settled and get more comfortable your left side of the body. So you're basically you have to take your
Gotcha.
right diaphragm and you have to be like, hey, you have to shut off. I need the left diaphragm to work properly.
Yeah, so it's going to take a little bit of
Yeah.
some self-awareness
And that's where,
some control, some
like Mike said,
good
the
mind-muscle
90-90
connection.
positions. And sometimes I have people reach and basically feel their left abs more than their right. And it'll start helping them with breathing.
So if you're in that, I think this goes right back to actually one of your Instagram posts, Eric, and you were in a 90-90 position and you reached that right arm up, so you're rotating that thorax, and then that's driving the air into the left diaphragm or driving you to use your left diaphragm.
Creating a dome on
Is that correct?
on the left diaphragm for being able to get air into the right side. So creating the left diaphragm to be positioned in a good position to let the right get air in. And a lot of
Gotcha.
times that's what I
Okay.
have people do is right reach and get them to rotate their sternum so think their upper rib cage towards the left and then pull down into that left ab, left hip to get them out of this conversation of right turn spine.
Love it. Love it.
It's
Like a mad
it's
scientist.
complicated with the airflow, but I definitely think it's a place that people need to address more in training
Yeah,
settings.
it's no different than
Can you
it's
do
no
it
different
from
than squatting.
a simply 90-90 position? The supine 90-90 position, can you do that same thing that we were just talking about? Is that the best way to probably start on your back? If you do that 90-90 position again and then you reach that right
For
arm
me,
up.
I would start
and-
there if that individual has what we would call an open scissor position. So meaning they have that a little bit of an anterior pelvic tilt and their rib cage tilts backward posteriorly. And then what would be is like your front of your pelvis is dropping down, the bottom of your rib cage is pointed up.
Okay.
And so you have
Okay.
now, if we put you in a standing position, vertical, you now do not have a proper stacked position of your pelvis and rib cage. So how do you expect your diaphragm to be able to drop down and expand 360 degrees properly if you're cutting off all the space in the back of your body where it should be moving, right? So in that position, if I put them into a supine 90-90, I know that the rib cage is now completely horizontal. And then if I put them into that 90-90 position, I flex my hips to 90. Now I can move my pelvis back into a completely stacked position. So what I'm doing is I'm training myself to get back to a completely stacked pelvis and rib cage position
Spine.
without any type of gravitational forces that are pulling me out of position or making me have to focus on stabilizing my spine in any way. The ground's going to do all of it for me, and then I can now just focus on conditioning or training my breathing pattern while I'm already in a good position or the position that I would like to achieve. And then slowly, what do? We work ourselves up from that position. Maybe we then go into quadruped and we do some breathing there, kneeling, half kneeling, and then finally back to standing. And if we've worked through all those positions, like you said before, Matt, developmentally, we progress through all those positions as a baby. Then what we can do is retrain ourselves to breathe properly. All this stuff is hardwired in there. That's the beautiful part of it all. It's there. We just need to get back to it and retrain our brain. And in other words, like look for that lost document in that computer file that's somewhere tucked away. But we can do it if we go back to where we started.
I think a lot of people have tough time either believing that they can do it or just wanting a quick fix, and it's just there's no way to do it except to do it. So these simple regressions are tedious, but they go a long way, and you're doing catch-up work. So you have to stay consistent with it. It's just not going to happen overnight or in a week if you've been breathing improperly for hours and hours.
I think that's a good point, Matt. Like a lot of people aren't going to feel or see the immediate payoff. Or even I've had clients who come in and they just want to lift heavy and pick up a bar off the ground or press overhead, and I have them lie on the ground first and do some crocodile breathing, and they look at me like with this look like we're going to spend time doing this, like breathing. But there's for me, there's a twofold.
But there's many benefits to it, and longevity, long term, you're not going to hurt the person. They're going to have movement patterns,
right? Even more so than training proper movement breathing mechanics. What it also does is it creates a sense of like consciousness. So now you have breath awareness, you have awareness of yourself. And so many people come in and work out after like a stressful day or something, they just were having a conversation. We're just not connected to ourselves. We're so disconnected. Getting back and focusing on just a couple focused breaths, not even like really doing it to like realign our position, but just stopping and breathing and focusing on the breaths can actually get you into a good point of self-awareness, make you more conscious of where you are in space, shut down and make it.
That's one reason why I always suggest yoga 100%. Too. Just get people to think about breathing for 45 minutes an hour, and they're just going to become more aware of it. Little do they know that they think they're just there for the stretch or something.
If someone wants to come in lift heavy, and you're like, oh, we're going to do breathing, and they're like, why? People don't realize that you're regulating pressure up and down a gradient that can actually help you in your capacity work while you lift. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's key.
Airflow is performance.
And that's what a lot of people will give you a little pushback. Be like, hey, this is going to make you better holding a lift, doing a bike sprint, whatever it is. It can help control your system.
If you wanted to increase horsepower out of your car right now, I guarantee the cheapest, best bang for your buck upgrade would just be to that and just widen your exhaust pipe, just thicken the exhaust, allow for a better exit, allows for better.
And
intake.
Think about that analogy. If you have a small exhaust and you put in a lot of air intake, what happens? You're not getting the optimal performance because you're not getting a lot of that gas out. So it's got to be like give and take.
So let's talk about what the scientific part of that is. When we talk about anaerobic threshold, right? So that, or we'll call it a ventilatory threshold, which would be kind of when your body, so this is that moment when, let's say you're running and then you get to that point where now you're breathing so heavy that you can't, you're now trying to clear more CO2 than you can take in oxygen. So there's that crossover point. Right. And so when that happens, yes, now your performance from that point on is going to start to suffer. So So we got to
Yeah,
train that
exactly.
obviously at high intensities, but we also have to train it at a very low or no intensity, which is just prepping ourselves to pattern it so that when we do get into that point of high threshold stability, for example, when we've got 315 pounds on our back and we're going down into a 1 rep max for a squat, that we can now create the pressure through our thorax that would properly stabilize our spine so that we can get out of the hole when we get down at the bottom of that squat without dumping our whole torso forward. So creating that pressure, you're now training yourself at the beginning to now have, like you guys said, that carryover when you are actually under the bar or you are focused on the performance aspect of it. Now your mind's been there. It's like I've learned how to breathe properly. At the beginning, my body recognizes it versus like just jumping into a workout from a stressful day where you're already like short, quick breathing. You're not getting a full breath to really brace properly. So yeah, there's an absolute. So I mean, these are great points to try to sell to people the importance of why we need to train this and why we need to pay attention to diaphragmatic breathing is a movement. Like if we see it dysfunctional, if you see a dysfunctional squat, you're going to stop that person's squat if their knees are caving in. So why are we going to not stop them when we see them breathing and their shoulders are shrugging up, right? And we see that dysfunction. Diaphragmatic breathing is a movement too. And, for coaches, we need to recognize that and not be afraid to say, hey, like we're going to stop and breathe for a second because you're just not doing it properly. Because if you're not breathing properly, then none of these exercises are
Right.
going to work
It's
well for
basically
you.
your limiting
You know?
factor.
Or even having some type of warm up that includes breathing. I think a lot of coaches miss out on the fact of having some type of movement pattern that has breathing involved in it, because that's going to warm them up for, like you said, having that 315 on their back. I mean, it's the same idea of why you're going to walk in and squat that day, and you're probably going to get into the position a couple times with just your body weight before you start throwing weight on
So
yourself.
do
It's just
Do you
the
guys
same
know?
way
Do you guys know the
of
story?
warming
Well,
up.
this is a perfect subject for this. Do you know the story of the training mask? So this is
The high
that
altitude one? Yeah.
elevation, simulated elevation. Yeah.
Yes.
So
I
this is
know the
called the
mass. Yeah.
training mask. This is the brand. It was like the first brand that came out. And so if you guys remember when it first came out, they were marketing it as it's going to mimic,
Yeah.
elevation training or training at
Um,
altitude. Well, there wasn't a whole lot of science that backed that up. And what do you guys know who Brian McKenzie is? So he's a guy who wrote a
no.
book with uh, his name's escaping me right now. But he wrote a book that had to do with breath. He was also into the CrossFit endurance world, and he took the training mask and said, I want to try this thing out. He thought it was stupid. He's like, this is really dumb. Why would anybody do this? But let me try it out before I like publicly, denounce it. And so he tried it out, and what he found was it restricted him. It first of all, it made him only breathe nasally. So it forces you to breathe just through your nose. And what he found was instead of it is simulating, altitude training at altitude, it actually improved his motor control. And so it
Hmm.
forced him to essentially breathe properly when he was wearing the mask, how he should be, which was, primarily nasal breathing. And when you're breathing through your nose, you have to breathe, a lot slower. So if you notice that, that's one thing you can, if you see somebody breathing very heavily, tell them to only breathe through their nose. If you only have to breathe through your nose, you're going to slow down dramatically. But what it did was so he started
Interesting.
training and he got he notices like, wow, this is really improving my motor control. He starts using it with clients. The client's motor control is improving very rapidly with various corrective exercises and things, just wearing the mask, just because their breathing is proper. And so he goes back to the training mask people and is like, this is what is going on with this. So they decided to test it out a little bit more, and they completely changed their marketing from altitude training to now using this to help you improve like motor control and movement and help you, essentially just train yourself to breathe
That's great.
properly. So it was a complete marketing shift, but what a great discovery. And essentially that's all it did was it forced you to just breathe the way that we're supposed to breathe, which is slowed down, more controlled through the nose. I
So,
just thought that
Mike,
was
would you
so
consider
cool.
that sort of like, when people
That's
have
pretty
like,
cool.
what's it, panic attacks and they breathe through the paper bag? You're literally you're controlling the air
Asthma,
gradients in and
yeah.
out of your system, which is key.
Yeah. So by breathing
Exactly,
more,
because
you're making it
when you
worse,
breathe
actually.
more, you're actually lowering your levels of CO2 in the system, which is going to lower your uptake of oxygen.
Correct.
But also, I tell all people when they try to go breathe through their nose, and I'm sure you've had this, they're going to feel like they're suffocating. They hate you because they're like, I'm not getting any air, but they're actually getting more quality gas exchange than they realize.
100%. And better filtered air too.
But doesn't the way that your body want to exhale based upon levels of carbon dioxide? Like don't we innately sort of have a reflex to when we have carbon dioxide build up, like increase respiratory rate?
Yes, because most people, I would say the majority of people are dysfunctional breathers, 100%. And because they have conditioned themselves to not know how to consciously slow down that breath.
I guess my question is this mask, is this a strengthening tool or is this getting us back to where we should be naturally?
I think it's getting you back to where you should be naturally. And also, so there's a couple things here. So have you guys heard of the Buteyko method? The Buteyko method is essentially for like what Eric was saying, people who have panic attacks, people who have asthma, who, don't get enough oxygen in. And what this does is it's primarily focused on what yoga would call like the pranayama breathing or like nasal breathing. So it is trying to keep your mouth closed and just focused on really slow breaths with actually a hold at the top and a hold at the bottom. You guys may have heard of like box breathing before. So box breathing would be like a 5-5-5-5. So you breathe in over the course of 5 seconds, you hold your breath in for 5 seconds, you exhale over 5 seconds, and then you hold all of your air out for 5 seconds before you breathe back in and start that cycle again. And that would be 20 seconds would be one breath. So if you start to train yourself to do that and only breathe through your nose, it's essentially healing asthmatics. So anybody who goes into what they're trying to do is anybody who is having like an asthmatic attack, they try to train them when they're not having their asthma attack to go into that slowed down, counted breathing where they're actually holding inhale and exhale.
Basically practice it when they're not in
so when they do get into that when they do get into that attack, they can now snap into it real quick. They can because what an asthmatic will do is they'll actually start breathing heavier because they're scared. There's fear there. They're trying to get more oxygen, but it's like Eric explained it perfectly. It's actually worse for them to do that because of the CO2. So this is training them to now just fully oxygenate their body a lot better. And when you're breathing through your nose, this is another point that Brian McKenzie talks about, you are filtering the air. So the Buteyko method also uses it for people who have seasonal allergies. So training yourself to breathe through your nose, when you're breathing air in through your mouth, it's completely unfiltered. You're inhaling all the crap that's essentially in the air, bad particles, anything that's in there, you're getting into your mouth. Pollen. When you're breathing through your nose can filter out probably more than 90% of what you're actually breathing in.
And I think that's
if you just breathe through your nose,
to
which I thought that was really fascinating.
I think a lot of people you notice breathe through their mouth and that's just a telltale sign that their breathing is off right away. Now, Mike, I just kind of messing around with that. What are your thoughts of kind of implementing that stuff into like a training session with like, say like a core exercise or a squat and stuff? You ever thought about that stuff? Because I've kind of messing around with like the breathing. Obviously, I wouldn't do it on a new client, but if you're seasonal and want to kind of do like a deep squat with that tension hold breathing and be able to control it and not hyperventilate, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think, as we know, adding more variables of complexity to a movement pattern. So like asking somebody to now go through a movement pattern and forcing them to consciously focus on their breath may be a little bit too much for them to focus on. But if that person's really got that movement dialed in, then maybe I focus on the breathing mechanics. But really, that's usually not the case. Usually somebody is, I want to use the breath to actually improve their motor control. And if their motor control is bad, I'm not going to have them focus on breathing as well. So what I may do in that case is get them into different isometric positions. So maybe let's take like if it's a squat, for example, I may have them stand at the top of a squat and have them do a focused breath. Then I may have them go down, and maybe this is just a regular air squat or bodyweight squat. Then maybe have them go down, sit in the hole, do a full breath there, exhale, come back up to the top, do it again. So now they're doing more of a simulated isometric style exercise. They're doing the pattern, but now they're also consciously breathing, not having to think about breathing while they're moving at the same time. So that's probably how I would train it, and then slowly allow them to now pick up the pace with that movement pattern. And I would almost guarantee, because I've done this, I've experimented with this myself. To your point, I haven't done this with any clients, and especially any novice clients, but I've done this with myself, where I will actually do yoga and I'll sit on the ground at nighttime for like 20 minutes and go through various yoga poses, maybe just hold a plank, and I will just sit in an isometric plank and just focus on my breath. And it's amazing. You can feel your body, how it starts to tremble and shake when you're isometrically holding something. And as you're focused on your breathing, all of a sudden there's this stillness that comes over you. And little by little, it's gone. And then you're just breathing and you're sitting there just chilling like a villain. And I mean, I can do that. It would be a whole nother element to try to coach somebody through that. But again, I would start in
what
I would
I
start
do
in
for,
the
like,
isometric
beginners
positions.
is I'll do anything
by
in
far.
supine. So whether it's even if it's a glute bridge, to have them exhale fully and hold, even if it's 5 seconds at the bottom. I know the first couple times they're going to do it, they're going to feel uncomfortable because I'm basically telling them not to breathe, where their body's going to go panic. I don't like this is stress. I have to take an inhale. And that's how I approach beginners, to kind of shut down their breathing in an activation setting or just in a glute bridge position. That would be my go-to.
Yeah, but also what's happening too is if they do slow down the breathing and they get enough breaths under their belt, what they're going to feel is this more of an oxygenation of the system, and they're not going to have the need to want to gasp for air as they exhale and hold that exhale out.
Oh yeah.
You guys know like the Wim Hof method? You've heard of that?
Oh, I was just going to bring that up because we totally forgot to talk about it, but I didn't really get enough time to practice all of them, or the ones that I wanted
Part
to.
two.
But I think we're absolutely going to be doing a breathing episode 2.
We can go forever
part
with
2.
this. Yeah.
Seriously, and I still have like 3 things written down right here that I want to make sure we talk about.
Well, so Wim Hof method, essentially what he does is he does a very deep inhale, exhale, and he'll do about 30 to 50 breaths. So if I was to simulate it, it would be something like, and he does it through the mouth, so it would be like, it's almost like a slowed down hyperventilation, if that makes sense. And he'll do like 30 to 40 breaths. So what happens is you get all tingly, the body starts to really get oxygenated. So you're really forcing oxygen into your system, oxygenating your blood. Almost to like, if you guys know, like, most people are around like 97, 98% oxygenated blood, oxygenated level. You can get, like he said, you can get over 100% oxygenated with that method. But what he does is at the end of those 30 to 50 breaths, at the very last one, you actually fully exhale all of your breath. And as you do that full exhalation, you hold. And what he says is, and I've actually experimented this with myself and other people who I've tested it on, is you have them do a breath hold test before they do the breathing method, and then you have them do it after with an exhalation hold, and they end up holding it for almost twice as long. And simply because we've oxygenated the blood so well in our system that it allows us to, and it's the most calmest, like, relaxed breath hold you'll ever do. When it's kind of crazy, it's like, I just let all the air out of my body. Why am I sitting here so calmly and I don't really feel like I have the need to breathe?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
So this
like
guy,
full.
to me, is so far ahead of the game. Like, you know what I mean?
For sure.
And like maximizing the human potential.
And he's healing his immune system. He's teaching other people how to heal their immune system. Like, he has these workshops and stuff, but he also has an app, just a free app, the Wim Hof Method, WHM. It's on your Play Store, but check it out. It's got a lot of cool breathing techniques.
The ability to regulate your core body temperature through this breathing method is incredible too. This is how he sat in an ice tub for an hour and 55 minutes, the world record, just using this breathing method, and maintained his normal body temperature in an ice bath.
And even like, Mike, when you held that exhale,
I mean, it's incredible.
What did you feel? Because I felt almost just like, I didn't feel struggle. I just felt like completely just like stress free. It was just like,
Yes. Yes. Yeah, did you ever do like like if we were to do a breath hold,
yeah.
most people are going to take a big breath, like an inhale and then hold it, but you're like,
Mhm.
you feel all this pressure in your head when you do that. Do you know what I mean? Or this strain. When you do the exhale, it's like you just released all that pressure. But like you said, you've just oxygenated your system so well, and that's being transported through your body that you don't feel the urge to need. And so what happens is with that, like after you do your initial, like the way everyone else does it, you do that inhale and then hold, and then your first breath when you need to
You
like
gasp,
get
yeah.
some air, you're like straining and you're like yeah, like you let it all out and then you take a big breath in. When you do that, like you said, the exhale, it's calm, but then when you actually first take that initial breath after your breath hold, it's like a regular calm breath right back in, and it's like this stillness. It's like it's so hard to describe unless you do it. I would definitely recommend people check that out. Get the app that Matt talked about.
Yeah.
But you also get this like awakening of all of your senses when you do that. Like your body just feels like, it's almost like this
And
calm
then
energy, like this calm,
I got up
energized
and walked
feeling.
around. I was like, I felt
Which is
lighter.
which
I
is
was
a,
like,
a amazing
this
feeling.
is different. It was. I highly recommend it for anyone out there listening. You
Yes.
try this method.
Yes, not in a bathtub where you can potentially pass out and drown. Not while driving. Definitely in a seated position,
Now, have you
preferably
done
on
it
the
standing?
ground.
Because I did it.
Um,
I did it
you know,
standing in supine,
uh,
and I've actually found standing felt
I
more
have
comfortable to me.
I have done it standing, and yes, I felt like I said, extremely energized. I've also done the push-up test. I don't know if you've done that before.
I saw that
Yeah, so
one
it's
too on there.
essentially it's the breath hold, and you would first test how many push-ups you can do, and then you would do the breathing, 30 to 50 breaths, do the exhale, do the breath hold, and as you're doing the breath hold, you're immediately going to do as many push-ups as you can. Uh, and we talked about this before, that exhalation and that bracing of that intra-abdominal pressure. What you end up getting is this really like tight, stable core position as you're doing these push-ups, and you can just crush push-ups through that breathing technique. And I think it's because we talk about this, proximal first and then distal mobility. So creating that proximal stability through the core, and that diaphragm has been trained so well to just fully expand and shrink, and then you do your exhalation and you brace. You have now created such a tight vacuum for you to be able to now do your movement off of. I found it to be
And that
I
is optimal
felt so much
performance of a
stronger in that
human body right
position.
there.
Um, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
I'm gonna have to give
Oh
these
yeah,
a shot.
there's a lot that we.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna be having a
Yeah.
breathing episode 2 or part 2 for sure. There's so much that we didn't even talk about. And the one thing I did want to mention though is just bringing it back to our listeners. Probably, at least one of my favorite breathing warm ups that's core related and that's in every single one of my programs is just the dead bug, lying on your back, arms up, knees above your hips. You're taking a big breath in, pulling that belly button down. As you exhale, you're sending out one arm and one leg. You're trying to crush the ground with your lower back. I think it's just such a good warm up for, like I said, it's a good core warm up, but more so that breathing pattern gets people
And
to
you can
get that
even,
core
I know, Matt,
control
we
and
were talking about this last week
pressurization,
about
and then
testing. You
still
can
be able
even use
to
it as a
relax the
test
diaphragm.
and see if you have your client or an eval do a dead bug and you tell them, okay, pull your ribs down and hold that position, and they go to move their arm or leg, and that rib cage and hip go further away and they come up, and they continuously do that, you're going to realize that that person's living in a state of extension. And to get air in, they need to extend to get around the ground and get their back off the ground to get air in. That is a very good exercise to correct breathing, but it's a good way to kind of figure out how someone's breathing pattern is just dysfunctional,
That's a good eval for
which is
sure.
a great tool to use because you see that right away and you're like, hey, this
That's
is
an
how we can
interesting
fix
point.
it,
I'm glad
and
you
this is how
said
your
that.
breathing should be.
I can't even wrap it up any more than that. So that wraps up this week's episode. just want to remind people to write in an email if you had any questions or comments or complaints. thinkfitnesslife@gmail.com. And next week, we're going to talk about conditioning. And I think it'll just be Eric and myself next week because Urso's getting a little busy, but hopefully he'll be back with us the following week when we go into goal setting. We'll see you guys next week.